Joining me now from Beijing, Martin Jacques, the best-selling author of When China Rules the World. And from New York, Stephen Orlins, president of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. And in Shanghai, Zhang Weiwei is a professor of international relations at Fudan University. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Zhang Weiwei, I'd like to start with you. There is a prediction out there that the Chinese economy will be the world's biggest by the year 2020. That is just 5 years away. How is that going to change the global economic order?
Well, indeed, China is rising fast, and if it's measured in terms of purchasing power parity, China may be already the largest economy. So it's changing the world already. You look at the financial crisis, 2008, actually China came to the rescue of the West. Of course, all of China's own self-interest as well. So China's economy is intertwined with the global economy. And eventually, I think China's performance, good or bad, will impact all the countries in the world.
Martin Jacques, I want to bring you in here because we can argue about the date, but it looks like it's going to happen with obviously the largest economy. But you've said that this is the first time that a developing economy will be the world's largest. What effect is that going to have on the Western economic model and the rest of the developing world, considering that's where most of the people are?
Well, I think very profound. I mean, really, what we're witnessing is a big shift in the nature of the global economy on the basis of the transformation of many developing countries, of course, led by China, where, if you go back to the 1970s, the developed economies accounted for 2/3 of global GDP. By 2030, they will only account for 1/3, and the developing economies will account for 2/3 of global GDP. What's that going to mean? It's going to mean a transformation in the nature of the international economy and the institutions of that economy. I mean, unless the IMF reforms itself, it's going to become increasingly marginal. Likewise, the World Bank. And we're going to have, I think inevitably, we're going to have a range of new international economic institutions, because increasingly the power in the global economy over time is going to be exercised by the developing economies, by China especially, but also India, Brazil, and so on. And inevitably, the old industrial economies that we, the United States, my own country, Britain, and so on, are going to become progressively less important.
Stephen Orlins, do you agree? You're going to be meeting with President Xi Jinping on the 22nd out there on the West Coast with a lot of business leaders from the United States. Do they share Martin Jacques' view that the future is China and the developing world?
I think there's no question that U.S. businesses are focused on the development of China's market. But I see the changes as evolutionary, not revolutionary, that we're not going to see an overturning of the current economic institutions, but we're going to see things like the development of the AIIB, where China is going to be the center of new institutions. So I think Martin has a very strong point there. But what it's doing from the prism of U.S. China relations is bringing the two countries and the two peoples closer together.
Are you sure,
as we're seeing
Stephen,
Chinese...
are you sure about that? Because remember what the argument over the AIIB, and the US has always said, look, China's been a free rider on the global economic system, but then when it moves to set up a different institution, it got criticised and the US lobbied against it. So are they really coming together, or is this sort of jockeying for position a little bit?
Well, the businesses are no doubt coming together.
Oh, right.
We just completed a study of Chinese investment in the United States per congressional district, and it is growing geometrically. And that is bringing people closer together. In terms of the two governments, I think the U.S. decision on not participating in the AIIB was wrong, and I think there are a lot of people in the academic, think tank, and government worlds who agree with that view. I think it was rather short-sighted. They were worried about governance, and in the end, it was a decision which was not strongly accepted either by our allies or by people in the United States. So are there going to be changes in the architecture? Yes, but are they going to put the United States and China at odds economically? I think not.
I want to go back to Zhang Weiwei in Shanghai, because there has been a rapid evolution of Chinese economy over the past 35 years, and it's not based on the sort of Washington consensus capitalism model. So what is that? And are we seeing the change evolutionary, as Stephen said, or is it more revolutionary considering the pace of change?
Indeed, I actually share this view that China is the beneficiary from the current international system, international order. But indeed, China also said that this system should be evolutionary, adapted to the new and changing times. So China is at best a reformer, not a revolutionary.
But what in terms of like the Western economic model and also the political model? That is obviously very different.
Yeah, you're right. The model of the China model is very different. In terms of economic model, I think it's more or less a mixed economy in which the state and visible hand and invisible hand are combined, and the state sector and non-state sector are combined. In terms of political model, I would call the China model as selection plus election, rather than simply relying on election. So this combination of political economic models is working reasonably well for China.
Yes, a kind of meritocracy, as you've described it in your articles. So, Martin Jacques, is this a model that's being exported? Considering the resistance that we've seen in developing economies to swallow what the IMF has prescribed over the last decades, does this work better?
Well, it certainly worked. It certainly worked incredibly well for China. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that China has never presented itself or argued that it is a model for others. I mean, I don't think that's really been the Chinese tradition, and I don't think it's how China sees itself today. I think more China, has certain experiences and propositions for developing countries. For example, the importance of crucial importance of development, crucial importance of investment, crucial importance of infrastructure. And certainly those kind of things have had a great influence in the developing world. There's no question that if you are seeking development as a developing country, then where are you going to look? Well, I think first and foremost, you're going to look to China. And you can see this influence very powerfully. I mean, China's influence still in the developed world is very limited. But I think in the developing world, it's a different story. And of course, as you said earlier on, the fact is that 80% of the world's population, roughly speaking, live in the developing world.
Stephen Orlins, this is a sort of counter-narrative to what we've been hearing here in the US in the last few months. China's stock market, of course, has had a big fall. There's been lots of comments about the slowing growth rate. But then we had CEOs like Tim Cook out of Apple coming and going, look, the future is China and it's very bright. Where you sit as a businessman, where's it going? And do you believe that we're looking at a correction to this model?
I think the third-party plenum reforms of the 18th Party Congress talked about changing the model, that letting market forces play the dominant role. I think the Chinese leadership has concluded that this model needs to be reformed, and that's what they're trying to do. We're beginning to see it. I think the United States doesn't fully understand the implications of the reforms that President Xi wants to effect, because those are ultimately going to once again strengthen the U.S.-China economic relations. That when these reforms are implemented, it's going to make the market for American companies in China even better. And what we need to do is help President Xi, as much as we possibly can, implement those reforms.
Zhang Weiwei in Shanghai, we're in the third year of those reforms. And of course, Stephen is alluding to the fact that China is becoming less of an export economy, more of an internal market, very much like the United States evolved as well. How is that going? And there's obviously going to be bumps in the road, right?
No, actually, I think, China has been carrying out its reforms non-stop for almost 3 decades. And the result is fascinating. And China continues with its reform programs with some difficulties, but continues with market orientation. At the same time, the state should play a better role as decided by the party's Congress. You know, whatever problems with the China model, if you look at the performance as a whole, China is the only major economy that has never experienced this kind of financial crisis, fiscal crisis, economic crisis we see in the West. And most Chinese and Chinese households experienced a wealth revolution over the past 30 years. It's amazing. So we should build up on this success and make it better.
Martin, Jacques, before we go to the break, so what is the West getting wrong in terms of the perception of the China today and the Chinese model?
Well, I mean, I think there's a sort of, I mean, of course, there are many attitudes in the West. It would be a gross oversimplification to just describe it in terms of one view, one idea. But I think that one of the persistent problems in the West is a kind of underlying pessimism about China, that basically at some point the wheels are going to come off, you know, that this is a political, and ultimately I think the view is based on a political view, that the political system is unsustainable. Now, I disagree with this view. I think that on the contrary, the political system is actually at the heart of China's transformation. It's been absolutely crucial to it. I mean, the state's role has been, you know, profound. You can never describe, as Weiwei was saying, China's transformation has been essentially a market transformation. It's been the market and the state has been absolutely, you know, at the heart of this process. Now, I think Stephen's right that there's a bit of a shift taking place now, but I don't think we should for a moment think that the state is not going to remain profoundly important in China. I think it is. And I think that the more we can accommodate in the West, we can learn to understand and appreciate China in its own terms, rather than always requiring China to be, as it were, like us, then this will improve the relations between in particular in this case, between China and the United States, but more generally with the West.